I have processed 412 cadets through this intake bay in the past 2 cycles alone. I say that not to boast. I say it because it matters for context. I know what a cadet looks like when they step off the transit shuttle. I know the posture, the nervous energy, the wide-eyed scanning of the station architecture. I know the ones who are going to struggle and the ones who are going to thrive, usually before they've even handed over their intake documentation. I thought I knew everything I needed to know about reading a new arrival. I was wrong. The shuttle from the Terran Compact docked at 0609, standard procedure. We'd been notified 3 weeks in advance that the human exchange candidate would be arriving on this shuttle, which gave us enough time to prepare the modified bunk unit. Human biology requires a sleeping surface with more give than standard Tharing-grade platform beds, and to adjust the atmospheric pressure on Deck 4 by a fraction of a point, which the station medical team had advised based on the Terran Compact's provided health specifications. We were ready, or we thought we were. The other cadets from the shuttle came through first. 4 Velhari students from the consolidated academies, moving in that fluid, almost liquid way their species does. 2 Draven candidates with their secondary eyes already scanning the bay for exits, as Draven are instinctively prone to do. 1 Solhari, 7 feet tall and absolutely silent, which is normal for Solhari. They do not speak until spoken to, cultural thing. And then at the back the human. I'd read the file, I'd seen the photograph, I thought I was prepared. The file said, Cadet Reyes Marcus, age 24, Terran Standard, former Ground Infantry Terran Compact Security Forces, entered exchange program via merit selection, physical assessment, exceptional, psychological profile within normal Terran parameters. What the file did not say, what no file could have said, was what it felt like to watch him walk through that door. He wasn't the largest cadet in the bay. The Solhari candidate was nearly 1.5 feet taller. He wasn't the most visually striking. The Velhari cadets have bioluminescent markings along their jawlines that catch light in a way that always draws the eye. He wasn't even moving particularly fast. But there was something about the way he moved through the space. I've tried to articulate it in this log several times and deleted the attempts. The closest I can get is this. Every other cadet who walked through that door was reacting to the environment. Eyes up, taking in the ceiling height, the lighting arrays, the sounds of the station. They were orienting themselves, which is a completely sensible and healthy response to a new place. The human wasn't orienting. He was assessing. There's a difference. Orientation is absorbing, assessment is cataloging. His eyes moved through the space the way a structural engineer looks at a building, not seeing what's there exactly, but seeing what could go wrong. He caught me watching him, made direct eye contact immediately, which startled me slightly, because most new cadets don't look at the intake officer directly until the intake officer addresses them. It's an authority deference thing, common across most species with hierarchical social structures. He didn't look away, either. He held the eye contact for exactly as long as it took me to give a small official nod, then he looked away on his own timeline. I noted it. He presented his documentation in order, answered the intake questions in clipped, precise galactic standard. His accent was distinct, vowels shaped slightly differently than the algorithm-generated voice we use for language training, and took the orientation packet I handed him without looking at it. You'll want to review that before your first assembly, I told him. Standard intake line. Already read the digital version, he said. Thank you. And then he walked toward the elevator bay, because he already knew where it was from the schematics. I stood there for a moment after he left. Then I picked up my communication pad and sent a note to Cadet Overseer Zelmora, who would be supervising the new cohort. The note said, "The human arrived. Pay attention to this one." We met the human at dinner. I'd heard things, of course. Everyone had heard things about the Terran exchange candidate. The Terran Compact has been a member of the Galactic Assembly for less than 40 years, which in historical terms is basically yesterday. They're still a novelty, humans. The training academies don't get many of them, and the ones who do apply for the exchange program are apparently put through an additional screening process on the Terran side, because the Compact is very particular about which of their people interact with galactic institutions at this stage of their membership. So there was some expectation built up. I expected something impressive, something that would immediately signal why this particular human had been selected over others. He was sitting at a table in the corner of the commissary, eating something from a container he'd apparently brought from the shuttle, reading from a small handheld device. He'd chosen a seat with his back to a wall and a clear sightline to both exits. I noticed that. My study partner Fenlari, who was with me, noticed it too. Military habit, Fenlari said like she understood humans. She didn't. None of us did. We introduced ourselves. He looked up from the device, set it down. He didn't just minimize it or put it to sleep. He set it completely face down, which I thought was interesting, like he was committing to the conversation, and said his name. Marcus, he said, and then after a small pause like he was making a choice, you can call me Rays if you want. Either works. We sat with him because there was space and the commissary was crowded. For the first few minutes it was a little uncomfortable. He wasn't unfriendly exactly, but he wasn't performing friendliness either, which most cadets do in first social encounters. The performance of approachability. He just sat there, answering questions directly, not offering information that wasn't asked for. Fenlari asked him what he'd been doing before the exchange program. Infantry, he said. Terran ground forces. Yeah. What was that like? He considered the question. I watched him think. There was a pause of maybe 4 seconds, which doesn't sound long but in conversation is actually quite a significant pause. Instructive, he said finally. Fenlari laughed a little nervous. That's all. That's the part that matters here, he said. I wrote that down in my journal that night because I thought about it for a long time. It wasn't evasive exactly. It wasn't rude. It was just very precise in a way that felt like it had weight behind it, like he'd decided carefully how much of himself to bring into the room, and that was the exact amount he was bringing. The conversation moved on. We talked about the training schedule, the assessment tracks, what we'd heard about the physical evaluation courses. He listened more than he talked. When he did offer something, it was either a question, precise, pointed, the kind that made you realize he'd been processing everything quietly and had found the gap in the information, or a short observation that usually turned out to be more accurate than anything else that had been said. At one point, Cadet Drethsal, a Draven who'd come over from another table, started going on about the physical trial rankings from the last cohort. Drethsal has a tendency to turn things into competitions before they've even started. He pulled up the rankings on his pad and started explaining which species had historically performed best on which metrics. Velhari have the best reaction time scores, he said. Draven hold most of the endurance records. Sulhari topped the strength categories. He paused and looked at the human with what I can only describe as performative generosity. Terrans have historically scored mid-range on most metrics, but the exchange committee said you tested exceptionally on the Terran assessment, so. What's the training room like? The human asked. Drethsal blinked his secondary set of eyes. What? The main training facility. I saw it listed on the intake map. What's the equipment like? It was such a clean redirect that for a moment nobody realized what he'd done. Drethsal started describing the training room, and the conversation moved on, and I sat there thinking. He didn't take the bait. He didn't correct Drethsal, didn't offer counterarguments, didn't defend human performance metrics, or make claims about what he personally was capable of. He just declined the entire frame of the conversation and moved it somewhere more useful. I thought about that for a long time that night too. I wrote in my journal, I think the human is going to surprise people. I didn't know then how significant an understatement that would turn out to be. The new cohort presents a reasonably strong profile overall. I've outlined the individual assessments below for your records. On the Velhari candidates, both Vastharan and Fenlari come in with strong academic credentials from the consolidated academies. Fenlari in particular has an impressive theoretical record in tactical navigation. They should both perform well in the cerebral assessment tracks. Physical performance will likely be moderate. Velhari physiology advantages in reaction speed sometimes fail to translate in sustained endurance environments. On the Draven candidates, Drethsal is exactly what I expected from his file: confident, competitive, and genuinely skilled. His secondary eye depth perception gives him a notable advantage in the targeting drills. The second Draven candidate, Keth Morin, is quieter but possibly more technically capable, worth watching. The Sulhari candidate, designated Cass in our records, at their request, as their full designation is complex for most species to vocalize, is an unknown quantity. Sulhari are notoriously difficult to assess in early cycles because they reveal very little. I've run the standard profile tests, and the results are within expected ranges, but with Sulhari, expected ranges cover enormous ground. And then there is the human. Cadet Marcus Reyes. I'll be direct. The human is a variable I don't know how to account for, which is an unusual position for me. I've reviewed the Terran Compact's assessment documentation, which is thorough and well organized, and it paints a picture of someone in the top fractional percentile of his age cohort on most physical metrics. The psychological workup is interesting. He comes up as high on what the Terran assessment calls task persistence, environmental adaptation, and stress tolerance. Low on need for social approval, which tracks with my brief observations of his interpersonal conduct so far. What I cannot assess yet is how he'll perform in our specific environment, under our specific pressures. The honest truth is that exchange candidates from species with less galactic integration history are unpredictable in ways that are difficult to model. Not because they're less capable, I want to be clear about that, but because the performance variables that most of my assessment models are calibrated against are built from data that doesn't include many Terrans. I've requested additional consultation from the exchange program's historical archive. There have been 14 previous Terran exchange candidates. I'm reviewing their performance records now. Preliminary note: the records are interesting, more varied than I expected. Several of the previous candidates performed roughly as predicted. 3 performed significantly below expectation, and 2 performed in ways that the archive classification system apparently had difficulty categorizing, because someone has marked both records with the notation, standard metrics insufficient. See supplemental. I requested the supplemental files. I'm still waiting on clearance. In the meantime, my working assessment of Cadet Reyes is potential unknown. Watch and evaluate. Do not make assumptions in either direction. I sent the intake officer's note to the relevant file. Pay attention to this one. The cohort began the standard first-week physical evaluation battery today. I want to document this carefully because I've been asked to maintain detailed records on the human candidate, and because what happened today is the kind of thing that seems small in the moment and only becomes significant in retrospect. We started with the gravity calibration run. Standard procedure: we adjust the room to 1.3 standard gravity and run the cadets through a basic obstacle circuit. It's not designed to be punishing. It's designed to establish a baseline and to see how each cadet handles gravitational stress relative to their home environment. Some species from low-gravity planets find it very difficult. Some from high-gravity environments find it trivially easy. Humans live at approximately one standard, with some variation across their planet's surface. So 1.3 should represent a noticeable but manageable increase. The Draven candidates moved well, as expected. Their homeworld runs slightly above standard. The Velhari struggled. Their world is closer to 0.8, and the extra weight showed in how they moved, that liquid fluidity becoming labored. The Sulhari is hard to read. They completed the circuit without expression and stood at the finish waiting while the others were still running. The human ran the circuit in the middle of the pack on pure time, faster than the Velhari, slower than the Draven. Middle range, which is where the predictive models had placed him. But I noticed something. The circuit has a section, between Obstacle 3 and Obstacle 4, where there's a raised platform the cadets have to cross. It's set at an angle, intentionally, and the surface has a low-friction coating that causes most cadets to adjust their gait. The way they adjust tells you something about their proprioception and instinctive balance response. The Draven candidates both slowed and widened their stance. The Velhari candidates both reached for the handrail. The Sulhari crossed it without adjustment, which is remarkable actually, and I made a note. The human, and this is what I keep thinking about, the human hit the platform at the same pace he'd been running and adjusted mid-stride, shifting his weight distribution in a way that took him across the surface without slowing, without reaching for the handrail, without any apparent conscious decision. Like his body had already calculated the coefficient of friction before his brain had finished registering the problem. He was talking to himself, very quietly, under his breath, not intended for anyone. I was close enough to pick it up on my monitor's audio. He said slick, okay. That was it, 2 words, a note to himself, an acknowledgement of a variable filed and accounted for, and then he was past it and running the next section. It sounds like nothing, but I've been training cadets for 11 cycles, and I know the difference between someone who completes a course and someone who learns the course while they're completing it. The first group runs the obstacle. The second group is already mentally rebuilding the obstacle while they're still on it, cataloging its properties for future reference. I noted it in the log. Something happened at dinner again. It started with Drethsal, which honestly, most things this week have started with Drethsal. He has a gift for creating atmospheres of low-grade tension without quite doing anything you can formally object to. He's very good at it. I think he might not even be fully aware he's doing it. He pulled up some statistics on his pad, Day 4 performance rankings, the preliminary data from the first assessment sessions, and started talking about how the numbers looked exactly as expected. And by as expected, he meant Draven candidates at the top of most categories, Velhari mid-high, the Sulhari in the strength and endurance brackets, and the human in the middle. It's not a judgment, Drethsal said, which is what people say when they are absolutely making a judgment. It's just data. Terran biology is what it is. The exchange committee says they're exceptional for their species, but that's, he shrugged in that fluid Draven way, relative. I watched Rays while Drethsal was talking. He was eating, that's the first thing. He didn't stop eating or look up or change his expression. He was having what appeared to be some kind of self-heated meal from a container he'd brought, and he was eating it methodically, and he looked completely unbothered. What's your actual score on the gravity run? Drethsal asked him, because apparently the data wasn't specific enough and he wanted to make it personal. Rays looked up, chewed, swallowed. Logged, he said. I know it's logged. I'm asking what it was. You can read it off the board same as I can. Drethsal paused. I'm just saying the numbers are a snapshot of Day 4, Rays said, not heated, not defensive, just corrective, like he was clarifying a factual inaccuracy. We're on Day 5, the numbers change. Then he went back to eating. Drethsal wanted to say something else. I could see it. But there's a specific kind of confidence that's very hard to argue with, and it's not the loud kind, it's the kind that doesn't need you to agree with it. Drethzal's confidence very much needs agreement. Ray's doesn't. It's just there, contained and dense, like it's powered by something internal that doesn't require external fuel. Drethzal dropped the subject. Fenlari leaned over to me after and whispered, "He's strange." I thought about it. "I think he's just not performing," I said. "Most of us are performing, like even a little, he's just not." Fenlari thought about that for a while. "That might be the strangest thing about him," she said eventually. Today's session was the tactical simulation, standard first-week format, not the full scenario suite, just the introductory sequence designed to assess baseline spatial reasoning, threat identification, and coordination under mild time pressure. We ran the cadets through a 3-chamber sequence. Each chamber presents a different challenge. One is target identification under visual interference, one is navigation through a shifting obstacle array, and one is a cooperative problem. 2 cadets have to coordinate without verbal communication to achieve an objective. I'll skip the detailed performance notes on most of the cohort and focus on the observations relevant to Cadet Ray's, as instructed. Chamber 1, Target Identification. The human's identification accuracy was 97.4%, which is the highest score in this cohort and in the top tier of all cohorts I've run in the past 4 cycles. His speed was unremarkable. He was not the fastest, but his accuracy was near perfect, which is unusual because most cadets who prioritize accuracy sacrifice speed and cadets who are fast sacrifice some accuracy. He appeared to operate on a policy of, be fast enough, be correct. Chamber 2, Shifting Obstacle Navigation. This is where it got interesting. The obstacle array shifts on a random but patterned algorithm. Most cadets figure out after 2 or 3 shifts that there's a pattern and start to predict. The human figured it out after the first shift and then started anticipating the second pattern shift while still navigating the first. He completed the chamber in the second fastest time overall, behind only the Solhari candidate, who has physical advantages that make direct comparison difficult. What I want to note is that while he was navigating Chamber 2, I had a monitor on his biometrics. Heart rate elevated. As expected, the course is physically demanding, but the elevation was lower than I'd expect for the speed he was moving. He was running near his limit but not at it. He was holding something back. Not conserving energy in the way that suggests fatigue management, deliberately maintaining a buffer, keeping something in reserve. Chamber 3, Cooperative Problem, paired with Cadet Fenlari Velhari. They were tasked with moving a sequence of weighted objects between 2 platforms without verbal communication, under a time limit. This is usually the most revealing of the 3 chambers, because it shows social intelligence, not just physical or analytical. They solved it in 48 seconds. The current session record was 51. I watched the footage afterward. The human initiated the strategy. He moved to one of the objects first and looked at Fenlari directly, then looked at the other object, establishing the division of labor non-verbally. Clear, unambiguous communication without words. When Fenlari hesitated once on the sequencing, he adjusted his own movement to give her more time without being asked, without drawing attention to it. Just compensated seamlessly. After the chamber, Fenlari was talking to Vas Tharin and said something I picked up on the monitor. He made it feel easy. I don't know how. I've been doing this for 11 cycles. I know what exceptional looks like. Bren. I'm following up on my clearance request for the supplemental files on the 2 prior Terran exchange candidates whose records were flagged. I've been reviewing the first week's performance data on Cadet Ray's, and I want to understand the context of those prior records before we move into the more intensive assessment phases. His Week 1 numbers are strong but not overwhelmingly so. If I were grading purely on numbers, I'd say above average, particularly on accuracy and cooperative tasks, with some intriguing notes from Veth Kron on behavioral patterns during assessment. What I'm struggling to categorize is the qualitative data. Veth Kron noted the gravity run adjustment, the mid-stride recalibration on the low-friction platform. I reviewed the footage. I've since reviewed the footage from the other 5 assessment sessions this week. I've been looking for a pattern. I found one. Every single time he encounters a new physical variable, a surface with different properties, a piece of equipment he hasn't used before, an obstacle with an unexpected behavioral characteristic, there is a very brief, almost imperceptible pause in his movement pattern, less than a second sometimes, and then he continues, but differently. He incorporates the new information into how he's moving, and it stays incorporated. He doesn't have to encounter the same variable twice. This is, technically, what all good cadets do. Adaptation is part of what we're assessing. But the speed of his adaptation is not what the models predict for a Terran candidate, not by a significant margin. I'd like the supplemental files, please. Zelmora. For the purposes of documentation and context, a brief description of the main training facility referenced in subsequent reports. The primary training room on Deck 4 is designated TR7, colloquially known among cadets as the box. The designation is somewhat misleading. TR is not a simple room. It is a modular adaptive environment, approximately 40 meters by 40 meters in footprint, with a ceiling height that can be adjusted between 6 and 22 meters depending on the training configuration. The walls, floor, and ceiling surfaces are composite panels that can shift, extend, retract, and reconfigure on command from the instructor's control station. The floor is embedded with a gravitational adjustment grid that can vary gravity across different zones of the room, a standard feature for multi-species training environments, as different species often benefit from training in gravitational conditions closer to their homeworld norms. The room can sustain up to 3.2 standard gravities across its full floor area, or significantly more in localized zones. Equipment in TR7 includes the standard force resistance array 8 units, adjustable, the impact barrier system used for collision training and physical endurance assessments, the elevated traverse system, a set of aerial elements suspended from the adjustable ceiling, and the environmental simulation suite, which can generate heat, pressure, humidity, reduced oxygen, and a range of other atmospheric variables. The room is designed to be essentially indestructible under normal training parameters. The composite panels are rated for forces substantially in excess of what any known cadet could generate. I include this detail because it becomes relevant. Context: Week 3 marks the beginning of the intensive assessment phase. The standard pedagogical approach is a significant escalation in difficulty. We move from baseline evaluation to performance pressure. The sessions are designed to be hard. They are supposed to stress the cadets, to find their limits, to determine where they break down. The humans' Week 2 performance had been consistently strong. Veth Kron's notes were increasingly annotated with variations of, not what the models predict, and reviewing footage again. The supplemental files arrived on day 9. I read them twice. I'm not going to summarize their full content here, but I will say that by the end of them, I understood why they'd been given a separate classification. Today's session, the endurance circuit. The endurance circuit is exactly what it sounds like. TR7 configured in its maximum challenge layout, full elevated traverse system, gravity at 1.4 standard, impact barriers active at resistance level 6, which means they push back. The circuit is designed to run for 90 minutes. Very few cadets complete it. The objective is not to finish. The objective is to see how far you get and how you handle the point where your body tells you it's done. The Draven candidates performed well until about the 40-minute mark. Then Drethsal began to visibly fade. He powered through, which I respect, but his form deteriorated and he was working on pure will from about 50 minutes onward. Fenlari and Vastharan both hit their limit around 35 minutes, which is within normal range for Velhari physiology in elevated gravity. Cass, the Sulhari candidate, ran the circuit for 63 minutes before I called them to the rest station, not because they were failing, because I wanted to preserve them for the rest of the week. The human ran the circuit for the full 90 minutes. He's the first cadet in 4 cycles to complete the full session, and by the time the 90 minutes were up, his form was not perfect. He was tired, visibly, but it hadn't deteriorated. His stride at minute 89 was recognizably the same as his stride at minute 12. Different intensity, same structure. Afterward I asked him, standard post-session check-in, how he felt. He thought about it, sweat on his face, breathing elevated but recovering quickly. "What's the next session?" he asked. "Tomorrow. Rest day first." "Right," he said, "good." And he went to get water. I stood there for a moment. I called Zelmora that evening. "I think," I said, "that our assessment framework might not actually have a ceiling for him." There was a pause. "I was afraid of that," Zelmora said. "The whole cohort is talking about the endurance circuit. Drethsal isn't saying much, which is unusual for Drethsal. He's been quieter since the session. I think he thought, and I don't say this unkindly, it's just the truth, he thought the endurance circuit would be where things realign to his expected order. He's trained hard, I know he has. He's genuinely good. But the human ran the whole thing. I've been trying to understand it. I've been trying to put it into a framework that makes sense to me. The thing is, Reyes doesn't look superhuman. He's not enormous. He's not 7 feet tall like Cass. He doesn't have the secondary visual system that gives Drethsal his targeting advantages. He doesn't have Fenlari's reaction time edge. On paper, on the individual metrics we use to build physical profiles, he's above average, but he's not dominant in any single category. But something is happening when all those metrics run together at the same time. It's like, I've been trying to find the right word, it's like he's compounding. Most of us, when we're tired or under pressure or in an unfamiliar situation, we default. We fall back to whatever we're best at and we let the other things slide. It's efficient. It makes sense. You play to your strengths when the system is under strain. He doesn't seem to do that. When he's tired, all his capacities stay online. Slightly reduced maybe, but all present, all functional, all talking to each other. The strength and the accuracy and the spatial awareness and the adaptation, they don't compete, they cooperate. I mentioned this to Fenlari. She thought about it for a while and then said, "Maybe that's what happens when a species doesn't have one dominant trait to fall back on. When you don't have a best thing, you can't default to it, so all the things just have to learn to work together." I wrote that down. I keep thinking about it. Bren, I've reviewed the Week 3 data comprehensively, and I need to make a recommendation I was hoping I wouldn't have to make. The standard assessment tracks are not generating sufficient discriminating data for Cadet Reyes. That's not a complaint. It's a measurement problem. Our assessment tools are built for a performance distribution we understand. We know what good looks like. We know what exceptional looks like. We have reference points for everything up to the 99th percentile within our established species data. Cadet Reyes keeps presenting data that sits at or above our reference ceiling on most combined metrics. I want to be careful here. I don't want to overstate things. On individual metrics in isolation, he's not record-breaking. You can look at any single number and find a prior cadet who scored higher. But the integration pattern, the way the metrics function together under pressure, is outside our modeling. My recommendation, escalate to the Tier 3 assessment suite. For the record, we don't typically run Tier 3 on anyone until Week 6 at the earliest. Tier 3 is designed for senior-level candidates who have demonstrated readiness. It involves significantly higher stress parameters, more complex scenario structures, and environmental conditions that push into zones where physical risk becomes a factor. I'm not recommending this lightly. I've spent 3 days on this decision. My reasoning: if our standard tools can't see him clearly, we need better tools. And I want to understand what he is before the end of this program, not after. I'll need your sign-off. Zell Mora. Zell. Authorized. Tier 3. Modified parameters increase in stages, not all at once. I read the supplemental files on the prior Terran candidates again, after your note. I need to ask you something directly. Have you seen the footage from the Muravel 3 incident? The one from the second candidate whose file was flagged, the structural damage assessment. I ask because I want to make sure we're operating with full situational awareness. Let me know when you start Tier 3. Bren. Day 21, Tier 3 begins. I've structured today's session as Stage 1 of the escalation, elevating gravity to 1.8 standard across the full floor area, activating the impact barrier system at resistance level 8 maximum for standard training, and running the combat response circuit. This is the first time we've used the combat response circuit this cycle. It's a reactive system. The impact barriers don't just sit there. They track and engage, requiring the cadet to respond rather than just push through. I gave the cohort the usual morning briefing, outlined the parameters, watched their faces. The Velhari candidates went quiet. 1.8 gravity is significant for them. Their world is 0.8, remember, so they'd be operating at more than double their native gravity. I could see them doing the math and not liking the answer. The Draven candidates looked focused, which for Draven means they went into their pre-performance state. Drethsal started working his jaw the way he does when he's psyching himself up. Cass showed nothing, as Cass always shows nothing. The human asked one question: what's the floor rating? I told him, rated for 3.2 standard. He nodded, said nothing else. I ran the session. At 1.8 gravity, the combat response circuit is brutal. The barriers come at you faster than you'd expect, and they hit harder than you're ready for, and the floor weight changes everything. Every step costs twice what it should, and when you need to move quickly, you find out very fast whether your body has what it takes. Fenlari and Vastharan both had to stop inside the first 15 minutes. Not failure, they lasted as long as their physiology could sustain under those conditions, and I documented their performance accordingly. Drethsal made it to 31 minutes, which is actually very good. He was fighting the whole time, giving everything. I have genuine respect for his effort. Cass lasted 54 minutes. The Sulhari advantage in pure physical capacity is substantial. The human ran for 1 hour and 23 minutes, which is the full session length. He stopped 3 times, not because of fatigue, or not only because of fatigue, but because he was looking at the barriers, watching how they moved. At minute 46, he made a change in how he was moving through the circuit, and after that the barriers made contact with him less often. He'd figured out the engagement algorithm. 1 hour and 23 minutes. At 1.8 gravity. With the barriers at level 8. Cass was at the observation window watching the last 20 minutes of his run. Cass, who is 7 feet tall and physically capable of things that most species can't conceptualize. After the session ended, Cass turned to me and said, in that deliberate, weighted way the Sulhari speak, 2 words. He adapts. And then they walked away. Transcription from audio recording. Look, I'm going to be honest about this, which I maybe wasn't being honest before. I came into this program with a pretty clear picture of how things were going to go. I've been training for this since I was 12. Draven track record in the exchange program is strong. I've seen the historical data. I knew I was a strong candidate going in, and I thought I genuinely thought that the cohort composition meant I'd be competing primarily with CAS for the top assessment slots. I didn't factor in raise. I want to be honest about that. I made assumptions based on species data, and I was wrong to do that is the straightforward version of it. The combat circuit yesterday. I need to be clear about the gravity context, because I don't think people outside of training environments fully understand what 1.8 means on a practical level. My homeworld is 1.1, so the differential for me is 0.7. Every step I take costs 0.7 more than what my body considers normal. That adds up. Over 30 minutes, that is thousands of steps that are each wrong in a specific way, and your body is constantly making microcorrections, and those microcorrections each cost something, and eventually the account runs empty. His homeworld is 1. The differential for him is 0.8, more than for me. He's working harder per step than I am. He ran for nearly twice as long. I keep going back to that. It doesn't make sense in the framework I was using, and I've been trying to build a new framework, and I'm going to be honest, the new framework is uncomfortable for me. I think, and I'm still working this out, I think that human evolution does something to them that we don't have a good label for. Something about how they're built for an environment that tries to kill them constantly. I've read some of the Terran biology archives now because I needed to understand, and their planet is. Do you know they have weather events that can kill you? Like just weather. Not a weapon, not a predator. The air itself, moving the wrong way. They have fauna that evolved specifically to eat large creatures, and humans are in the large creature category. They evolved in an environment with no consistent safe zone and no species-level advantage to fall back on, and they're still here, and I think maybe that does something to you over millions of years. I think maybe it means that when the pressure goes up, they don't tap out the same way. I'm still faster. I'm still better on targeting. Those are real numbers and they're not going away. But I was wrong about the important thing. I'll be approaching the rest of this program differently. I've been watching Rays in the evenings. Not in a strange way, I mean during the cohort's free time periods in the common spaces. He has a routine. He eats. He reads from the small handheld device. He runs through what look like drills, not big movements, subtle ones, hand and arm sequences that I eventually figured out were probably the kind of thing soldiers do to maintain fine motor calibration. He does this quietly, without drawing attention, while the rest of us are having conversations or watching feeds. Tonight I asked him about it. He looked up from the hand sequences and thought about whether to answer, and then he said, "Running through contact points." "For what?" "For tomorrow," he said, "whatever tomorrow turns out to be." I sat down across from him. "Does it bother you?" I asked. "The level they're running the sessions at now, it's harder than what the program documentation described." He thought about it. That 4-second pause he does when he's actually considering something rather than just generating a response. "No," he said, "that's what it's for." "What?" "The hard part. That's why you come to a place like this." He looked at me with a directness that isn't aggressive, it's just very present. If it was easy, you wouldn't learn anything. I thought about it. Most cadets consider these session levels to be extreme. "Yeah," he said, "how are you sleeping?" The change of subject caught me off guard. "What?" "Sleep, you look tired. The gravity differential, right, takes longer to recover at lower than native gravity environments." He said it matter-of-factly, not unkindly. "The supplemental magnesium helps. Station Medical has it." I blinked. "How do you know what helps for Velhari physiology?" He shrugged. "Read the Velhari chapter in the exchange program species biology overview." Figured it might be useful. He'd read the biology overview for every species in the cohort. Of course he had. "Why?" I asked. He looked at me like the answer was obvious. "Because you're going to be training next to me," he said. "Makes sense to know how you work." Stage 2 parameters, per Overseer Zelmora's authorization. Gravity increased to 2.1 standard. Impact barriers at maximum resistance. Additional variable. Environmental simulation suite activated. Temperature increased to 41 degrees Celsius. Humidity at 80%. Reduced oxygen at 18.5%. Standard Terran atmospheric oxygen is 21%. The combined effect is supposed to simulate a genuinely hostile operational environment. I want to be explicit about what 2.1 standard gravity means for a Terran candidate. It means that every kilogram of his body weight effectively becomes 2.1 kilograms. His musculoskeletal system is working at more than twice the load it was built for. Sustained operation under these conditions is, by most galactic physiological standards, not something a Terran baseline body should be able to maintain for extended periods. Should be able to is doing a lot of work in that sentence, as I have been learning. I pulled the entire cohort that day and ran only the human. This was Zelmora's call, and in retrospect it was probably the right one. The conditions were outside what we could safely ask of the other candidates, but it also meant there were only Veth Kron and the monitors as witnesses for what happened. He walked into TR7 at 0730. The parameters were already active. The door sealed behind him. This is standard for Stage 2. Once the environment is active, it runs to completion or medical override. I watched on the monitor as the gravity hit him. You can always tell the moment someone feels it, the slight adjustment in posture, the recalibration of center of mass. He made the adjustment in a fraction of a second. He stood there for about 5 seconds. Then he started. I'm going to describe the first 30 minutes as factually as I can, because I've been asked for technical documentation and not subjective commentary. In the first 5 minutes, he ran the basic circuit, elevated gravity, slower movement than his previous sessions, visibly effortful. The heat and humidity were already working on him, sweat by minute 4. He was breathing more deeply than normal, conscious oxygen management in the reduced atmosphere. Minutes 5 through 15, he encountered the impact barriers. Level 10. I should note that level 10 is a parameter we have not used before in this cycle. Level 10 means the barriers engage with full mechanical force, which is designed to challenge candidates significantly above the Draven physical range. He was hit by the first barrier at minute 7, hit hard, he went down. He got up in 4 seconds. He was hit again at minute 11, went down. He got up in 3 seconds. Minutes 15 through 30, he stopped going down. I have watched the footage 6 times and I cannot identify exactly when the change happened. It was gradual, and then it wasn't like a threshold was crossed. He started moving differently in the barrier field. Not just faster, not just stronger, but differently. He was working with the mechanical pattern of the barriers, finding angles, using the forces partially in his favor. By minute 28, he had not been knocked down in 13 minutes. At 2.1 gravity, level 10 barriers, 41 degrees, reduced oxygen. I called Zelmora on the secure channel. He's still going, I said. A pause. How long? 28 minutes, he's not flagging. Another pause. What's the room reading? All within rated parameters, equipment is fine. How is he? I looked at the biometric feed. Heart rate elevated significantly, but not in crisis range. Respiration compensated and stable. Temperature elevated in the manageable zone. He's okay, I said. A longer pause this time. Let it run, Zelmora said.